Some names and details in this story have been changed for anonymity and confidentiality. Not all photographs are from the actual scene.
This place on the map of Washington state looks like a solid green spot, cut by thin veins of rivers. Olympic National Park is almost 1 million acres of wilderness, where it rains 200 days a year, and the moss absorbs the sound of footsteps before they even subside. On November 17, 2012, a group of surveyors working in a remote sector of the forest came across an object that had no right to be there. It was neither a body nor a tent. In the middle of the dense ferns, 15 miles from the nearest road, a rusty metal pipe 6 inches in diameter stuck out of the ground. It looked like a submarine periscope stuck in the ground. When one of the workers bent down to check the depth, he recoiled. Warm, musty air blew in from the black abyss of the pipe, and he heard a faint, barely intelligible sound. It was neither wind nor beast. It was someone singing a lullaby from underground. On August 14, 2007, the morning on the Olympic Peninsula began like hundreds of other mornings in the region, with a dense, damp fog clinging to the tops of centuries-old fir trees. Visibility on the roads was minimal, and the air smelled of pine needles and wet asphalt. At exactly 8 o'clock, 15 minutes in the morning, surveillance cameras at the entrance to the recreation area captured a dark blue Ford Explorer SUV. The car slowly drove past the ranger's booth and stopped in the already almost full parking lot at the beginning of the popular Salt Duck Falls trailhead. 2 young women got out of the car. They were 28-year-old Ashley Grant and her younger sister, 24-year-old Jessica Grant. To an outsider, they looked like typical tourists ready for an adventure. Ashley, who worked as a physical therapist at a large Seattle clinic, was confident and professional as she checked her gear. She had extensive experience hiking in the Cascade Mountains and knew how to behave in the wilderness. Jessica, a final-year architecture student, looked less determined. She agreed to the trip only because of the insistence of her older sister, who was trying to pull her out of her depression after a difficult divorce proceeding. According to the sign-in sheet at the Wilderness Information Center in Port Angeles, where the sisters had visited the day before, their plan was ambitious, but quite realistic for a trained group. They were going to hike the High Divide Loop, an 18-mile loop that passes through subalpine meadows and alpine lakes. The park permit, signed by Ashley's hand, indicated the location of the planned overnight stay, the Heart Lake area. At 8 o'clock 40 minutes, they slung their backpacks over their shoulders and headed deep into the forest. The first miles of the trail were wide and well-trodden. The fog slowly dissipated, giving way to the pale sun. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, when the sisters had overcome the steepest climb, they were spotted by an elderly couple of hikers from the neighboring state of Oregon. It happened in the area of Deer Lake. During the interview, the witnesses told detectives that the girls looked cheerful. They stopped on a rocky ledge to take some photos against the backdrop of a dense, coniferous forest and the mirror-like surface of the water. Jessica laughed as she adjusted the strap of her backpack, and Ashley checked the route against the map. They greeted the couple, exchanged a few words about the weather, and moved on, up the trail, where the forest became denser and traces of civilization disappeared completely. That was the last time anyone saw the Grant sisters alive. On August 16, 2007, the day the sisters were supposed to return to civilization, their Ford remained stationary in the parking lot. The sun had set, and the temperature had dropped to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but no one came out of the woods. The next morning, on August 17th, when the girls' phones continued to be silent and the car had not moved, Ashley and Jessica's parents raised the alarm. The response from law enforcement was immediate, given the difficult terrain and weather conditions. The Clallam County Police Department, in conjunction with the National Park Service, deployed a large-scale search operation. The operation involved helicopters from Whidbey Island Naval Air Station, equipped with thermal imagers. More than 100 volunteers combed square by square, moving in a chain through the impenetrable fern and salal thickets. The canine teams that arrived on the scene on August 18th came across a strange anomaly. The tracking dogs confidently picked up the trail from Deer Lake, but instead of following the official trail to the Heart Lake overnight campsite, they took a sharp turn to the west. The trail led into a dense wilderness area where ordinary hikers never go due to the lack of any trails and difficult terrain. The group of searchers followed this strange route for almost 2 miles. They climbed over the fallen trunks of centuries-old cedars and waded through thorny bushes. Finally, the dogs led them to the old, dried-up bed of an unnamed stream that flowed into the Saldak River. And then, the trail broke off. It looked unnatural, as if two adult women had just vanished into thin air in the middle of the forest. The dogs started circling in place, whining and refusing to go any further, not feeling any direction. The forensic team thoroughly examined the 500-foot radius around the spot where the trail broke off. There were no signs of a struggle, no drops of blood, no lost items, no water bottle, no energy bar wrapper, no scrap of clothing, only crumpled moss, which could be a human footprint or a deer bed. The silence of the ancient forest was oppressive. Huge trees covered with lichen stood like mute witnesses who did not want to reveal their secrets. The search operation lasted 10 days. Helicopters circled the grounds for hours. Volunteers raised their voices, shouting Ashley and Jessica's names, but the forest was silent. On August 27th, despite the family's desperate protests, the sheriff announced that the operation had entered a passive phase. In the official report, investigators put forward several theories. The most likely was an accident. The women could have strayed from the route to take a shortcut and fallen into one of the many hidden crevices, of which there are hundreds in the area. A predator attack by a cougar or bear was also considered, although the lack of biological traces made this theory shaky. The criminal version was considered unlikely due to the remoteness of the location and the absence of other people in the sector. The case of the Grant sisters' disappearance began to slowly turn into another folder in the archive of unsolved cases. The parking lot emptied, the volunteers went home, and the dark blue Ford was finally towed to the impound lot. However, one of the experienced trackers who worked with the dogs near the dry riverbed noted a strange detail in his private notebook that was not included in the official report. On the bark of an old oak tree, just 10 feet from where the dogs had lost the trail, he noticed a tiny, barely visible scratch at the height of a man's height. It looked too fresh and too even, as if someone had deliberately left the mark, or someone had stood there watching the girls before they disappeared. On August 31st, 2017, exactly 17 days had passed since Ashley and Jessica Grant were last seen on CCTV. The hope of finding the sisters alive in the wilds of the Olympic Peninsula was fading with each passing hour. Most of the search teams had already wound down their activities, and official reports were being prepared to change the status of the case to search for bodies. However, the forest that took the girls decided to return one of them in the most unexpected place. The events unfolded 15 miles north of the point of disappearance, if you measure the distance in a straight line through impassable mountain ranges and dense forests. It was an old logging area north of the town of Forks, near an abandoned private property known locally as the Blackwood Quarry. This area was considered dangerous due to unstable ground and old mines, so tourists had not been here for years. At around 11 o'clock in the morning, a group of 3 surveyors from a private company were assessing the rocks on the hillside. Alan Reynolds, the group's leader, a 50-year-old man, noticed something unnatural among the dense ferns. It was a gray plastic pipe, 4 inches in diameter, sticking up vertically out of the ground. Its end was carefully camouflaged with moss and branches to blend in with the environment. The workers' first thought was that they had stumbled upon a poacher's hideout or a drug lab, which sometimes occurred in these remote places. Armed with shovels, the surveyors began to carefully remove the top layer of sod around the pipe. After 10 minutes of work, the shovel hit something hard. Beneath the 6-inch thick layer of earth was a heavy wooden manhole made of thick boards and covered with rubber for waterproofing. The hatch was locked from the outside with a massive padlock, but the hinges had rotted away from moisture, and the workers managed to pry the cover off with a tire iron. When the hatch was thrown aside, a heavy odor of unwashed body, dampness, and excrement hit people in the face from the black opening. Alan Reynolds turned on a powerful flashlight and directed the beam deep into the pit. What he saw made him stunned. 8 feet deep was a fortified room. The walls were covered with expensive ship's plywood that was impervious to moisture, and the floor was dirt. In the far corner of this underground prison, on a dirty foam mattress, a human figure was squeezed together. It was Ashley Grant. In 17 days, she had changed beyond recognition. Her clothes had turned into filthy rags, her skin had turned an earthy gray, and her cheekbones stuck out sharply on her haggard face. She was emaciated to a skeletal state, with signs of critical dehydration. Her fingers were bruised to the point of blood, and her nails were broken to the root, a mute witness to the hours she had spent trying to scratch her way out through the plywood walls. The girl's reaction to the rescuers' arrival came as a real shock to the audience. When one of the young surveyors, wearing a bright orange vest and protective helmet, began to climb down the attached ladder, holding out his hand and repeating reassuring words, "It's okay, we'll help you, you're safe," Ashley did not rush to meet him. Instead, she let out a piercing, animalistic scream of terror. The girl pressed herself violently into a corner of her earthen dungeon, covering her head with her dirty hands and trembling all over. Her words, recorded in the subsequent report, sounded like the ravings of a madman. She begged not to touch her, repeating the same phrase. "Don't, officer. I passed the test. I didn't do anything. Don't punish me again." Her eyes, wide with terror, ran over the figures of the men above, looking for a threat that should not have been there. At 12 hours and 15 minutes, the first crews of Clallam County Sheriff's deputies arrived on the scene. The situation took a turn for the worse as soon as Ashley saw the men in uniform. Her panic turned into uncontrollable hysteria. She screamed that the man with the badge would come back and kill her if he saw her talking to the others. To bring her to the surface, paramedics had to use sedatives, as the girl fought back with her last strength, considering her rescuers to be torturers. The inspection of the underground shelter was carried out after the victim was evacuated. Investigators went down into the pit at 14 o'clock. The space was 6 by 6 feet. In addition to the mattress, there was a plastic bucket used as a toilet and several empty water bottles. But the main question that hung in the air remained unanswered. Where was the other sister? Jessica Grant was not in the pit. Investigators carefully examined every inch of the room, hoping to find a note, or at least a hint of her fate. Instead, they found things that raised even more questions. In the corner, sprinkled with earth, was an old dark green hiking backpack. When they opened it, they found a man's flannel shirt and a set of fishing hooks inside. It was neither Ashley's nor Jessica's. Next to the mattress was a pair of heavy leather boots, size 43. They were old, with worn-out soles, and clearly could not have belonged to either of the frail girls. These findings indicated that Ashley was not the first resident of this prison, or that someone else had been there with her for some time. But the most disturbing detail was an inscription scratched into the plywood with something sharp at the entrance to the ventilation pipe, which detectives noticed only under detailed lighting. She did not pass. There is only one left. Dear friends, before we continue to dive into this gruesome story, I ask for your support. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and like this video. Your activity is a signal to YouTube's algorithms, which helps to promote the content. Thanks to you, more people will learn about this case, and we will be able to continue to tell about the secrets that the darkness hides. On September 2, 2007, the intensive care unit at Olympic Medical Center in Port Angeles resembled an impregnable fortress. Armed guards were stationed at the door of room 304. Inside, Ashley Grant was lying connected to vital signs monitoring devices. The girl's condition was assessed by doctors as consistently serious. During the 17 days of captivity, she had lost 26 pounds of weight, which was a critical indicator for her build. Her body was covered with numerous bruises in various stages of healing, and her wrists were marked by deep, inflamed furrows from plastic ties that had eaten into the skin almost to the bone. Detective Michael Harris, who led the investigation, received permission from the doctors to conduct a brief interview, only on the condition that he did not put pressure on the victim. Ashley was under the influence of strong sedatives and tranquilizers, which were necessary to suppress panic attacks. Her voice was quiet, like the rustle of dry leaves, and her eyes kept darting to the corners of the room, looking for threats in the shadows of the medical equipment. From her confused, fragmented testimony, which Detective Harris recorded on a dictaphone, a picture of that fateful day began to emerge. According to Ashley, she and her sister did not get lost or stray from the trail because of their own recklessness. Their fate was decided by trust in authority. On the trail, not far from the lake, a man approached them. He looked impeccable, a polished National Park Ranger's uniform, a wide-brimmed service hat, shined boots, and a shiny badge on his chest. He behaved confidently, calmly, and professionally. "He told us to stop," Ashley whispered, clutching the edge of the hospital sheet with her white fingers. He said that an aggressive grizzly bear had been spotted up ahead in the Deer Lake area and had already attacked tourists. He said the main road was blocked, and we should immediately follow him to the evacuation route for our safety. The sisters believed the man in uniform. It seemed like a logical and right decision. He led them away from the trampled path, deep into a dense forest where the trees grew so densely that they obscured the sky. They walked for about 20 minutes, and with each step, the terrain became more wild and impassable. When Ashley first asked how much further to go to the safe zone, the mask of concern instantly disappeared. The man stopped, turned around, and pulled out a gun. This was not a robbery. Ashley remembered trying to give him her wallet and expensive camera with trembling hands, begging him not to touch them. But the ranger just laughed a cold, dry laugh and knocked the items out of her hands. He didn't want the money, Ashley told the detective, her eyes filled with horror. He started saying strange things about natural selection, that civilization, cities, and comfort had made people weak, that we have forgotten what real fear and the struggle for life are. At gunpoint, he forced the sisters to handcuff and blindfold them. Then they were separated. Ashley remembered being pushed into the same hole from which the surveyors had pulled her. But that was not the worst part. Ashley knew that Jessica was somewhere nearby. In the first days of her imprisonment, as night fell and the sounds of the forest faded, Ashley heard muffled screams. It was Jessica. She was in another underground bunker nearby. Ashley could hear her sister calling for her mom, begging her to let her go, crying in despair. These sounds were torture, but they also gave her hope. Jessica was alive. Ashley tried to scream back to support her sister, but each sound took away precious oxygen in the musty dungeon. This went on for 8 days. The screams became quieter, weaker, but they were there. On the 9th day, there was silence. Ashley pressed her ear to the cold plywood wall, holding her breath, but heard nothing. No crying, no moaning, no fist hitting the wall. Only a dead silence that pressed on her eardrums. When the hatch of her prison opened the next time for the ranger to drop a bottle of water and a piece of stale bread down, Ashley dared to break the silence. She asked about her sister. The man, whose face was always obscured by the brim of his hat, looked down at her. There was neither pity nor anger in his voice, only a cold statement of fact, like a scientist observing experimental rats. According to the interrogation report, he uttered a phrase that made Detective Harris's blood run cold. "The weak are eliminated. She didn't want to fight." The trapdoor slammed shut, plunging Ashley into darkness, and leaving her alone with the realization that her sister had probably lost in this cruel game. On September 3, 2007, the investigation into the Grant sisters' case reached a dead end, which at the same time became a point of no return. Ashley's testimony about the man in uniform cast a shadow of suspicion over every employee of the National Park Service. It was a crisis situation for the department. The management of Olympic Park gave detectives full access to the personnel files of all staff, including seasonal workers and volunteers. Over the course of 48 hours, the investigative team led by Detective Harris checked the alibis of 82 active rangers. The result was unequivocal and disappointing. Every single one of them had a confirmed location at the time of the girls' abduction. Some were at a meeting, some were patrolling another sector, as confirmed by GPS trackers, and some were on vacation out of state. The person who abducted the sisters was not a current employee. It was a phantom, someone who had access to a uniform, knew the protocols for communicating with tourists, and knew his way around the forest better than wild animals, but remained invisible to the system. The investigation changed its vector. Detectives began to dig up the archives of the HR department over the past 10 years, looking for those who had left the service with a scandal or were fired for disciplinary violations related to aggression. That's how the analysts came across the name of Silas Wayne, while searching through dusty folders marked "Dismissed." His dossier read like a psychological thriller script. 45 years old, a former military policeman, a combat veteran who, after serving in the Army, worked as a senior survival instructor at the Olympic Park. In 1999, his career ended suddenly and brutally. According to internal security reports, Wayne was fired for abuse of power during the arrest of a group of poachers. He didn't just arrest the offenders, he beat them, broke one's arm, and left them tied up in the woods overnight without water. To, as he explained in his explanatory note, teach them to respect the laws of nature. Wayne's psychological profile, drawn up by the Bureau's staff psychologist 8 years ago, contained disturbing markers: an obsession with control, a propensity for violence, and a fanatical belief in the theory of social Darwinism. Wayne believed that modern society degrades because it protects the weak, and that only extreme conditions can reveal those who are worthy of life. These views perfectly coincided with the words Ashley heard from her captor. On September 4, 2007, the police received a warrant to inspect the area around the Blackwood Quarry where Ashley was found. The land cadastre showed that the land formerly belonged to a shell company, Northwoods Holdings, which had gone bankrupt 5 years earlier. In fact, this land was a no-man's land, a gray zone that no one controlled or visited. It was the perfect place for a man who wanted to hide from the world and create his own rules. The SWAT team, along with forensic experts, returned to the pit where Ashley was being held to expand the search radius. What they found during a detailed inspection of the area shocked even police veterans. Ashley's pit was not an isolated cache. It was part of a complex, engineered system. Using ground-penetrating radar, experts found a network of drainage channels underground that had been converted into ventilation shafts. Within 300 yards of the first discovery, under a layer of moss and pine needles, they found several more prepared sites. These were not chaotic pits. It was a training ground. Wayne had built a laboratory here for his experiments. Every detail of this place was created with one goal in mind: to break Will. The remnants of the equipment found showed that he didn't just keep people there, he created conditions for them. Controlled water supply, sound insulation, complete darkness. He was playing God, deciding how many calories and how many hours of sleep a person needed to balance on the edge of insanity, but remain conscious. This place was a test bed for his philosophy. He tested the limits of human endurance, observing his victims as a naturalist observes insects in a jar. Investigators realized that they were dealing not with an ordinary sadist who enjoyed pain, but with an ideological fanatic who turned murder into a scientific process. In the evening of the same day, when the sun was already setting behind the treetops, one of the dog handlers working on the perimeter of the training ground noticed a tall, spreading larch tree growing on a hill with a perfect view of the place where Ashley was found. The dog started barking at the tree trunk. Looking up, the officer saw a roughly built wooden platform among the branches, 20 feet up. It was an observation post. Climbing up there, the detective found signs of a recent presence: a crumpled tarp, army-style binoculars, and, most frightening of all, a fresh cigarette butt of a brand that had long since been discontinued, but could still be found in old survivalist supplies. The ashes were still dry, even though it had been raining in the morning. That meant only one thing. When the rescuers pulled Ashley out of the hole, Silas Wayne was there. He was sitting in a tree just 100 yards away, watching the evacuation of his test subject through binoculars and perhaps evaluating the results of his experiment before disappearing into the brush, leaving behind a faint smell of tobacco. On September 5, 2007, the investigation into the Grant sisters' case received a critical boost based on one seemingly insignificant detail from Ashley's testimony. While in a state of semi-delirium in her hospital room, she remembered a sound. She claimed that in moments of silence, when the wind died down, a rhythmic, low-frequency humming sound came to her through the earth. It was not the sound of the forest. Acoustic experts analyzed the description and concluded that Ashley was hearing a powerful diesel generator operating at a considerable distance, the sound of which was spreading through the ground as a vibration. Using triangulation and knowing the approximate characteristics of sound propagation in the area, the search teams narrowed the search area. The trail led deeper into the so-called dead zone, an area of forest where logging was planned half a century ago, but abandoned due to the difficult terrain. It was there, 3 miles northeast of the pit where Ashley was being held, that topographic maps from the 50s indicated the presence of a temporary structure for loggers, labeled Old Spruce Cabin, the Old Spruce Cabin. The Special Forces team approached the site at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The hut looked like a ghost from the past, leaning walls covered with a thick layer of green moss, a caved-in porch roof, and windows boarded up with blackened boards. From the outside, it looked like a pile of rotten wood that nature was slowly absorbing back into its bowels. However, when the operatives got closer, the illusion of abandonment dissipated. At the back of the building, camouflaged by a pile of brushwood, stood a modern Japanese Honda generator, from which a thick, insulated cable stretched deep into the house. The engine was warm. The storming lasted a few seconds. After kicking in the door, the special forces expected to see devastation, but instead found themselves in a sterile, technologically equipped command center. The contrast between the exterior of the rotten shack and its interior was shocking. The windows were covered with bricks and soundproofing material. In the center of the room was a wide table with 4 monitors. The image on the screens was broadcast in real time. The detectives saw black and white images of different parts of the forest. The cameras were so skillfully hidden in the trees that the search teams passed by them dozens of times without noticing the lenses. Wayne saw their every move. He watched the rescue operation like a director watching his own reality show. On the shelves along the walls were neatly laid out supplies of army rations, designed to last several months of autonomous life, water cans, and medical kits for field surgery. On the back of a chair hung the very uniform Ashley had mentioned. It was a perfectly pressed khaki shirt and pants, used by National Park Service rangers. But upon closer inspection, the detectives noticed an important detail: the patches on the sleeves. They looked official, but the inscription indicated that they belonged to the Population Control Unit, a department that never existed in the park structure. It was a prop for his performance, designed to inspire instant trust in the victims. But the most terrifying discovery was not the monitors or the uniforms, but a stack of thick, black, leather-bound notebooks lying on the table next to a half-drunk cup of coffee. These were Silas Wayne's diaries. He kept them with meticulous precision, recording air temperature, humidity, the number of calories given to his subjects, and their psychological reactions. On the first page of the last notebook, the name of the experiment was written in large letters: Project Gemini. Reading these notes, the investigators began to understand the true, horrific purpose of the kidnapping. Wayne didn't just want to kill the sisters, he wanted to break their bond. The diary described in detail the methodology. He deliberately separated Ashley and Jessica, putting them in different pits but ensuring that they could hear each other. Then, the game of survival began. He gave one sister a double portion of water, but no food. The other sister was given a double portion of food, but not a drop of water. The purpose of the experiment, Wayne wrote in neat calligraphic handwriting, is to test the strength of kinship in the face of biological necessity. Will they start bargaining? Will object number 1 try to trade its water for object number 2's food, knowing that the transfer of resources is impossible without my mediation? I will offer freedom to one in exchange for the life of the other. Let's see which one turns out to be the alpha. The entry showed that Wayne was enjoying the process, manipulating the girls' minds by whispering lies through the air vents that his sister had already betrayed them. However, the last pages of the diary changed the mood from scientific to irritated. Wayne was unhappy with the results. Ashley was more resilient than he had predicted, and Jessica, on the contrary, had become a problem for his system. The entry, dated August 23, 2007, made Detective Harris fall silent. He read it twice before passing the notebook to a colleague. The text was dry and devoid of emotion. Subject number 2, Jessica, has refused to cooperate further. An unauthorized exit from the perimeter of the detention center was attempted tonight. The subject damaged the locking system, but sustained a serious limb injury while trying to overcome the landscape. Further use in the project is impractical due to loss of mobility and high pain threshold, which prevents the collection of clean data. Elimination is inevitable. The cleaning protocol is activated. These words were a verdict. They confirmed that Jessica was alive for 9 days after her disappearance, but on August 23, her fate was sealed with a cold-blooded stroke of a pen. Wayne did not write murder. He wrote liquidation, as in writing off damaged equipment. But what alerted the detectives even more was the last line on the page, written, judging by the color of the ink, quite recently, perhaps a few minutes before the assault. There was no date, just a short phrase. The observers are closing in. Time to move on to the final phase of the hunt. The tracks lead to the water. On September 7, 2007, the investigation, which had already begun to gain momentum, took an unexpected turn thanks to a detail that surfaced in the memory of the only living witness. Ashley Grant was still in the intensive care unit, balancing between a medically induced sleep and a painful reality. During a regular session with a psychologist, when asked about the day her sister's screams stopped, Ashley suddenly froze. Her eyes fixed on the ceiling, and her breathing became rapid. It wasn't a sound she remembered, but a smell. That morning, when the hatch of her cell opened, the ranger did not drop her food. He climbed down the ladder to check the fastening of her shackles. Ashley remembered that he was wearing the same heavy boots, but this time they were covered in strange mud. It was not ordinary forest soil or black soil. It was a sticky, yellowish clay that had a pungent, specific odor. Ashley described it as the smell of rotten eggs and burnt matches. The odor was so intense that it overpowered even the stench of the sewage in the pit. Detective Harris immediately contacted the Washington State Geological Survey. A consultation with Dr. Robert Stevens, a leading geologist, yielded instant results. The sulfur smell and yellow clay are characteristic signs of geothermal activity. There are two main locations in this region of Olympic Park with these characteristics: the well-known Olympic Hot Springs and the lesser-known, wild sulfuric water outcrops in the Boulder Creek area. The first location was a popular tourist destination, with a constant flow of people, so it was immediately rejected. That left Boulder Creek, a hard-to-reach area with deep ravines and scree, where even experienced foresters rarely went. The task force moved to the specified square at 12 o'clock, 40 minutes. It was an area that can only be described as a natural trap. The slopes of the ravine were covered with dense burellum, the trunks of giant trees that had fallen decades ago, and intertwined into an impenetrable barricade. The only way to move around here was with a machete, cutting a path through the thorny devil's stick shrubbery. At 15 hours and 15 minutes, the search team's dog, a German shepherd named Red, gave a bark at the foot of a rocky outcrop. The dog began to actively dig in a place where the soil looked unnaturally loose among the rocks. Forensic experts, carefully removing the top layer of branches and leaves, found that the ground had been dug up recently. Under a 2-foot-thick layer of clay, they came across a thick blue tarpaulin wrapped in construction tape. When they cut the tarp, their worst fears were confirmed. Inside was the body of Jessica Grant. But what the forensic experts found during the preliminary examination at the site completely changed the idea of what had happened. Jessica had not been emaciated to the point of skeletal death like her sister. Her body bore traces of horrific injuries, incompatible with life, but received instantly. Numerous rib fractures, an open hip fracture, and a severe head injury. The forensic expert concluded that these injuries were typical of a fall from a great height onto stones. This was confirmed by an entry in Wayne's diary about an attempted unauthorized exit. Jessica did not give up. She was able to miraculously get out of her hole that night. She ran through the night forest, in complete darkness, unable to see the road, driven by adrenaline and fear. But the forest was merciless to her. In the darkness, she did not notice the edge of a cliff above a rocky stream bed and plunged down from a height of over 40 feet. Silas Wayne did not kill her with his own hands, in the literal sense of the word. He found her body in the morning when he followed the trail of a fugitive. For him, it was just a botched experiment. He coldly wrapped the girl's body in a tarpaulin he had brought with him and buried it in sulfuric clay to hide the smell of decomposition from wild animals. It was a pragmatic garbage disposal, not a human burial. The discovery of Jessica's body was a tragic end to the search for the sisters, but it was only the beginning of the horror that lurked in the Boulder Creek ravine. While one group of forensic scientists worked to exhume the girl's body, another began to survey the surrounding area with probes and ground-penetrating radar. The soil in the area was soft due to thermal water vents, making it ideal for digging. 50 yards from Jessica's grave, the device showed another soil density anomaly, and then another, and a third. These were not natural cavities. They were staggered oval holes, camouflaged by years of fallen leaves and a new layer of moss. When they began to excavate the first of these old graves, they found remains that consisted only of bones and fragments of synthetic clothing that did not rot. A preserved tourist's token allowed them to tentatively date the burial to 2005. In the next pit, they found remains that, judging by the condition of the bones, had been in the ground for at least 4 years. These were the graves of those who did not pass Wayne's test. Those who were marked in his files as numbers 1, 2, and 3. Investigators realized the scale of the crimes. Silas Wayne did not start his hunt with the Grant sisters. He had been living in this forest for years, abducting lone hikers whom the police had considered missing in accidents. This ravine was his personal cemetery, where he dumped his failed projects. Every hilly plot of land in this cursed place could hide someone's fate. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in blood red, Detective Harris received an urgent radio message from a patrolman guarding the perimeter. Down by the creek, where the water washed away the clay, the officer had found an object that did not belong to any of the victims, but clearly indicated that the killer planned to return here in the near future. On a large, flat stone, as if on an altar, there was a fresh, still green cedar branch tied with a red ribbon, and underneath it was a piece of laminated paper with only one word printed on it. On September 10, 2007, Silas Wayne's face became the most famous image in the state of Washington. His photo, taken during his time in the military police, was broadcast on all regional and national television channels. The armed and extremely dangerous bulletin was posted at every gas station, motel, and campground from Seattle to Portland. The Federal Bureau of Investigation put him on its list of 10 most wanted criminals, issuing a federal manhunt. But the forest that Wayne claimed as his own continued to hide him safely from justice. The breakthrough in the case came at 10 o'clock in the morning. The rescue service dispatcher on duty received a call from the tiny town of Sappho, located at the intersection of important transportation hubs. The caller was the owner of a local gas station. The man, whose voice was trembling with excitement, said that a minute ago an old dark green pickup truck with dirty license plates had pulled away from his pump. The driver, wearing a low-pulled baseball cap, paid cash for a full tank of gas and bought a detailed map of British Columbia and Canada's highways. Despite his attempts to change his appearance, the driver had grown a thick beard. The gas station owner recognized him as the man from the morning news. The stranger's gaze drew the witness's special attention, cold, judgmental, completely devoid of emotion. Wayne wasn't running away in a panic. He was methodically preparing to cross the border, planning to disappear into the vast expanse of the Canadian taiga. The police reacted instantly, 11 hours and 15 minutes. Patrol crews blocked traffic on Highway 1, the main artery of the peninsula, creating an artificial traffic jam near the bridge over the Solidac River. The Sitka interception plan was activated. 20 minutes later, a patrol officer spotted a green pickup truck heading north. Seeing the flashing lights and the blocked road ahead, the pickup driver did not stop. Silas Wayne swerved sharply to the right, knocking over a road sign, and turned onto an old gravel logging road leading into the Bogachil River Valley. A chase ensued that resembled a scene from an action movie, but took place in the real scenery of a gloomy forest in the rain. Wayne's heavy pickup bounced on potholes, breaking bushes and young trees. Police SUVs tried to keep up, but the criminal knew the area better than any map. He drove confidently, on the verge of a foul, using terrain features to break visual contact with his pursuers. After 5 miles of frantic chase, the road came to a dead end near a washed-out riverbank. When the special forces reached the spot, they found only an empty car. The engine was still idling, and the driver's door was open wide. There was a map of Canada and a box of ammunition inside. Wayne left on foot. He waded through the river, despite the icy water, and headed toward the majestic massif of Mount Olympus. His plan was crazy but brilliant, to disappear among the eternal glaciers and snowfields, where aviation is powerless due to cloud cover, and where hiking groups cannot pass without special climbing equipment. An elite group of rangers and special forces with experience in mountain operations was assigned to lead the foot chase. They realized that the chances of catching up with the master of survival on his territory were slim. Wayne moved quickly, confusing the trail by using rocky scree, where no footprints remain. It seemed that he would slip away again, turning into a legend. But there was one variable in the fugitive's equation that he hadn't accounted for: the testimony of his victim. Ashley Grant, during one of the interrogations, recalled an important detail from their conversations in the woods. Wayne complained that he had been discharged from the army after injuring his left knee meniscus. He said that in wet weather and under heavy loads, his knee turned into a rusty hinge that blocked his movements. On September 10th, the weather was on the side of justice. Low pressure and high humidity, multiplied by a steep climb up a 45-degree slope, did the trick. The leader of the search team, Lieutenant Anderson, ordered them to focus not on the logical escape routes, but on those trails that were gentler, even if they were longer. He realized that Wayne would not be able to walk straight up for long. The pain would force him to look for detours. At 16 hours and 30 minutes, the group visually locked onto the target at the pass known as Thunder Saddle. Wayne was not running. He was sitting on a large, flat boulder, his back to the wind. He was wearing a homemade jacket made from pieces of military camouflage that camouflaged him perfectly among the gray rocks and moss. If he hadn't moved, the snipers might not have noticed him. When the circle of encirclement closed to within 50 yards, the officers ordered him to the ground over loudspeakers. Wayne made no sudden movement. He did not reach for his weapon, although he was carrying a hunting rifle. Instead, he calmly pulled a can opener from his pocket and opened a can of stew. He ate slowly, methodically chewing each piece, and looked at the muzzles of the guns pointed at his chest, with the indifference of a person watching a boring TV program. The detention went off without a single shot being fired. When two Special Forces officers snapped his hands behind his back and snapped the handcuffs on, Wayne did not resist. He just leaned heavily on his right leg, protecting his left knee. As he was being lifted off the ground, Lieutenant Anderson, who personally made the arrest, looked into the eyes of the killer. There was no fear or remorse in that look. According to the arrest report, Silas Wayne broke his silence only once. When he was being led down the hill to the helicopter, he turned his head to the lieutenant, smiled wryly, exposing his yellow teeth, and asked in a hoarse voice, "So, that blonde, did she survive?" The officer didn't answer, but silence was enough of an answer. Wayne laughed softly and added a phrase that was later quoted in all the newspapers. "So the strong gene won. Evolution works even when you try to stop it." He was put into a helicopter, and while the machine was climbing, Wayne did not take his eyes off the window. He was looking at the endless green sea of the Olympic forest beneath his feet. But he did not look like a man saying goodbye to his home. He looked like an owner who has hidden a treasure and knows that no one but him will ever find it. In his jacket pocket, which was seized during the search, they found a bunch of keys that did not fit any known locks in his house or cabin. Wayne remained silent about their purpose, but his look promised that the main part of his game had not even begun. On March 14, 2008, the Clallam County Courthouse in Port Angeles resembled a besieged fort. 2 hours before the start of the hearing, all the streets within a 2-block radius were blocked off by police, and a crowd of more than 200 journalists gathered at the main entrance. It was the end of a story that shook the entire state of Washington. In the dock sat Silas Wayne, the man the press dubbed the Devil's Forester. During the trial, which lasted 3 weeks, Wayne chose a tactic that shocked even experienced forensic psychiatrists. He refused the services of a lawyer, but did not say a single word in his defense. He sat motionless, dressed in an orange robe, and looked at the prosecutor with the same cold, analytical calm with which he had once observed his victims through the lenses of hidden cameras. His gaze expressed no remorse, no fear, no anger. It was the look of a man who believes that everything that is happening around him is just another stage of his great experiment, where the judge and jury are the same subjects as the girls in the pits. The verdict was announced at 10 o'clock in the morning. The judge, reading the decision, called Wayne's actions absolute evil, devoid of any human nature. Silas Wayne was sentenced to life without parole in a maximum security federal prison. When the last blow of the judge's gavel sounded, Wayne's expression changed for the first time in the entire trial. He smiled slightly at the corner of his mouth. This smile had a terrible reason. The investigation proved his involvement in the abduction of the Grant sisters and the murder of Jessica, but the question of the other graves found in the Boulder Creek tract remained open. Forensics confirmed the presence of the remains of at least 3 other people, but their identification was stalled due to the condition of the bodies. The prosecutor offered Wayne a deal: improved conditions in exchange for the names and exact coordinates of other graves that investigators suspected might be scattered throughout the park. Wayne refused. This was his final victory over the system. He took the names of his victims with him into a concrete cell, leaving dozens of families to live in the dark. There was only one empty seat in the courtroom that day, which was constantly pointed at by camera operators. Ashley Grant did not attend the verdict announcement. Her interests were represented by lawyer Robert Thornton. In his brief statement to the press, he said that his client was physically unable to be in the same room as the defendant, and also avoided any public events due to severe post-traumatic stress disorder. The reality behind the lawyer's dry words was much more tragic. According to the testimonies of close family friends, Ashley has never been able to return to a normal life in Seattle. The city that was once her home turned into a maze of panic triggers. The noise of cars reminded her of a generator. The sight of any person in uniform, whether a police officer, a supermarket security guard, or a postal courier, caused her to have uncontrollable choking and vomiting fits. She could not sleep with the lights off and checked the locks on her door 40 times a night. In the summer of 2012, 5 years after the tragedy, Ashley Grant made a radical decision. She sold her spacious apartment in the center of Seattle and all the possessions that reminded her of her past life. She severed contact with her colleagues and friends, leaving only contact with her parents. Ashley moved to eastern Washington state, to a remote area of the plains known as the Palouse. Her new home is a small one-story building that stands alone among endless fields of wheat and dry grass. The nearest neighbors live 3 miles away. But the main characteristic of this place is the landscape. Here, for tens of miles around, there is not a single forest. There are not even single trees that can cast a shadow in which a person can hide. The landscape is completely flat and stretches out to the horizon at 360 degrees. The local postman, who brings her mail once a week, told her that the windows in her house are never curtained. Ashley works remotely as a medical translator and hardly ever leaves her property. She spends her evenings on the porch, sitting in a rocking chair with binoculars in hand, methodically scanning the horizon. For her, safety means no blind spots. She needs to see anyone approaching long before they get to her door. For the thousands of tourists who visit the Olympic Peninsula every year, this national park remains a pearl of nature, a place of majestic beauty and tranquility. They marvel at the centuries-old cedars, photograph the fog over the lakes, and enjoy the silence. But for Ashley Grant, a woman who survived hell, this beauty has forever been a deception. In rare phone conversations with her mother, she admitted that sometimes, when the wind blows from the west, she thinks she can smell the damp pine needles and wet ferns. For her, the majestic forests of Olympic have forever turned into a giant green cage that swallowed her sister, broke her own life, and left her with an emptiness in her soul that cannot be filled. She survived, but a part of her remained forever in that earthen pit, listening to Jessica's screams fade away behind the wall. The story ended legally, but for Ashley, it continues every day as the sun sets over the horizon and the world plunges into darkness.